Welcome to the Stressless Eating Podcast, where we help diet-obsessed and food-crazed women break themselves out of the food and body prison, end the dieting madness, and take control of their health for good. I'm your host, Leanne Ellington, and this podcast is about answering one question. How can you heal your relationship with food and your body and take a practical approach to this whole self-love journey, but without all that restriction, obsession, and shame, and without needing years of therapy to do so? If you want to know the answer, you're in the right place. All this information is 100% free, so please subscribe to and review our podcast. This time of year is super tricky because it has the tendency to spin women out of control, or at least feel like they're out of control. And so if you have tendencies to be, on a wagon or off a wagon, or, air quotes, eating healthy or not eating healthy, or any of those black, white, all or nothing ways of living around food, this is a really triggering time of year, or at least it has the potential to be. And so this is where a lot of experts and influencers, they're giving you, tips and tricks to maintain your willpower or to white knuckle your way through cravings and temptations. But I don't believe that I would be serving you if I gave you that short-term mindset or tips and tricks, because the last thing you need right now is a how-to guide or a step-by-step list of how to put Band-Aids on the problem, because I've said this before and I'm saying it again, binging and overeating and feeling out of control of food, it's really just a symptom of restriction and that dieting mentality, as in the dieting and obsessing over food and labeling foods as good, bad, right, wrong, like naughty or not naughty. I'm saying, that is what I believe is causing you to overeat or eat more than you want to, or, flat out binge, or at least fear or worry that you're not in control of food. And so controlling food even more, or restricting or using willpower or dieting your way through that even more, is really just going to add fuel to the fire, and you're never going to really heal this, right? And it's that cycle where, Monday comes and you're gung-ho and you've shopped and you've got everything in your fridge that you need to ensure that the week is going to be a success. And you know how it is on those Mondays that you get started. Like at this point, you're actually looking forward to getting in those healthy foods and eating clean, because after your last diet, you went off the deep end really hard and your body started screaming at you. Like, how it feels when you go off the deep end and you feel bloated and you're heavy in your middle, maybe your pants are tight, and you're actually looking forward to feeling those hunger pangs from dieting, right? And then, the next day you're feeling really great. Like you already feel leaner and lighter, and you think to yourself like, hey, this dieting stuff isn't so hard. Like I've got this, right? And then the next day comes along and everything's still going well, but like maybe you're noticing you're a bit hungrier, or maybe you're a bit sore if you've been hitting those workouts super hard, right? And then the next day hits and that tiredness and lethargy starts creeping in from, maybe you're restricting carbs, right? And suddenly you're looking at your leafy green salad with a tablespoon of olive oil and it's topped with grilled chicken, and it doesn't seem to be doing the trick anymore. And like you're looking at your Instagram feed or, your friend's food or whatever, and you have eyes of envy and you think like, darn it, why does she get to eat anything she wants and look amazing, and I have to starve myself to lose a couple of pounds, or even to not lose a couple of pounds? But your mentality is strong. So, you go back to your salad because you're super determined, even though like this is not going to last very long. Like your inner being, like that voice in the back of your head really knows, right? And so we're getting towards the end of the week and all is going well, and you realize like, oh my gosh, it's the weekend, or in this case, it might be a Friday or Christmas Eve, or, Christmas, or that tricky time in between Christmas and New Year's. And like, you realize like, oh my gosh, we have family dinners and potlucks and cookies and treats will be all over the house. And your mind starts racing. You're like, oh no, like what is this going to do to my diet? Like what will I eat? If that stuff is around, I'll lose control. And you think like, I can't just eat what everyone else is eating. Like that's going to ruin all of my progress, right? And then maybe you start thinking like, damn, like why are the holidays having to ruin everything? Like, why can't I just be normal? Why am I so stressed about this all the time? Like, what the heck? And you get really frustrated with yourself, or you start feeling like, a bad wife or mom or friend or daughter, or fill in the blank with whatever roles you play, because everyone around you is so excited because it's the holidays, and you're sitting there like fearing that you're going to go gain a bunch of weight. And that internal cycle of chatter just continues on and on until the next day you wake up and you're like, damn, like what's wrong with me? Like, man, I just had Christmas Eve dinner and dessert and then Christmas dinner and dessert, and I'm not stopping the eating and grazing on all this junk food that's around my house, and now I've ruined everything and all my hard work is down the drain. And then another voice chimes in and is like, see, like this is just what you do. Like you can't stick with anything. Like just get used to it. Like you're going to be like this forever. Like what's the point? And then that's when you really go off the deep end and you're like, okay, screw it. Like you wake up, you eat like all the things in the morning. You're like, why not? Like give me a mimosa at brunch as well. And you're eating Christmas cookies as a snack and you're eating like all the leftovers from dinner last night. Plus you're like, why not? Give me dessert again. And then you binge watch Netflix as you're mindlessly scrolling through Instagram, comparing yourself, right? And then the next Monday rolls around, or maybe in this case, it's like New Year's, and you're like, okay, New Year's, this is going to be different, but you're also really bummed out. And on top of that, you believe yourself less and less every time you hear yourself saying like, okay, this time it's going to be different, or like this year it's going to be different. Or maybe you say to yourself like, hey, I'll start again, January 1st. But doing something at this point, it feels better than just sitting around and doing nothing. And even though you aren't actually like on it, you're not off either. And now you're in what I call the gray zone. And that living in that gray zone, sometimes it actually feels worse than when you're on or when you're off. But this is all you've ever known, this cycle. And so the cycle just continues, right? So again, this is not just, isolated to this time of year, but it also shows up this time of year, right? And so does any of that sound familiar to you? Maybe that's not the exact conversation in your head, but like there was pieces of it that resonated with you. Like, and asking yourself like, or I'm asking you right now, like, do you struggle with that whole on the wagon, off the wagon mentality, and you can't seem to stick with anything long term, especially when a holiday comes? Like, it totally works in a bubble, but then a holiday comes and you're like, crap, I don't have control over this. And maybe you feel like you're stuck on the all or nothing diet roller coaster. And so here's the thing, like, don't worry, first of all, because you don't have to stay there, but also like you are so not alone. A lot of women I talk to, they feel very isolated because they think like everybody else has it together and that this is like their problem and that they're weak-willed. But I promise you, like, do you know how many women I talk to that are in the same place that you are? Like, hopping from one diet to the next, knowing in their heart of hearts that, it might have a different name or different rules, but it's just another version of the same thing, like all that restriction or micromanaging what you eat or how much you exercise, or relying on willpower and motivation to get you through it. And then obsession, like always thinking about food or your body or your weight. Or the other camp that a lot of women fall into is they're just like, okay, I am so done with the dieting. Like, I'm so over this. Like, I just don't care anymore. But when we really get down to it, like, that's not true. They do care. They just don't know how to like figure this piece of the puzzle out, and this whole, like, no matter where you lay, no matter where your mindset is, it's friggin' exhausting, because even if you're in that camp of like, oh, I don't care, I'm just going to say whatever, you're still thinking about it. You're still like, giving yourself glances in the mirror, and still it's that cognitive dissonance, because it's like, no, first of all, your subconscious mind knows that you really do care. But also it's that cognitive dissonance of like, I know I should be doing something, but I'm witnessing myself doing nothing. And so that is just as exhausting as when you are on the wagon and you're restricting and counting and tracking and all that. It's friggin' exhausting. And I have so much compassion and love for you, because again, this used to be my life. And this was the life of all of my clients at one point too. And so the question is like, what do we do about it? So first of all, why do we overeat, and really like what causes that? So why do we commit to something and then, ruin it and ditch our own plans and again, overeat or overindulge or overconsume, right? And so this is one of the things I get asked all the time, like, Leanne, why can't I control myself around food? Like, why do I overeat so much? And also, why do holidays trigger so much for me, right? And, a lot of women are saying like, hey, Leanne, I want to lose weight. I want more energy. I want to feel great. But then I say that and then I just go put a bunch of crap in my body. And, this is such an important topic. And it's why I'm really excited about today's episode, because it's so rare that I meet a woman that struggles with her body that doesn't also struggle with overeating or just feeling out of control of food, or feeling like hyper controlling around food, which is just a symptom of like we feel out of control of it. So we think we have to control it, right? And so today we're going to put a voice to that question that so many women are asking themselves. And so we will just go ahead and get into it. Okay, so overeating in general, but really specifically during the holidays, it comes in many shapes and forms and sizes. So there's the whole, like, I know what I should be eating, but I can't get myself to eat it or stick with it mentality. There's mindless eating and comfort eating and stress eating. There's emotional eating, or eating your feelings, as I like to say. There's binge eating. There's boredom eating. Whatever form it comes in, it's really hard on us, right? It's not benign, right? It's really hard on our mind, our body, our spirit, and our mojo. And I'm sure you've noticed this too, right? Like, it causes us, first of all, to feel really bad physically. So whether it's the discomfort of eating too much or that lethargy we get when we're in one of those food comas, it's actually really hard on our bodies, right? But it also causes us to feel bad about ourselves. Like, when we feel powerless to control ourselves over food, or like, we feel like a failure, or we feel frustrated because even though we're smart and we're accomplished and we're amazing in so many ways, when this food thing still isn't in check, like, we feel really badly about ourselves. A lot of times that's the shame talking. And that, all of that, it causes us to show up differently in our lives. So whether that's in our relationships because we're ashamed of how we look or feel, or our ability to feel like we're being a good role model to our family, our children, our coworkers, our friends, or whatever, or whomever I should say, that we feel like we should be setting a better example for, or like simply in our ability to feel like we're being a successful woman or wife or mom or partner or sister, friend, boss, employee, you name it. Because when we don't feel good about ourselves because of food and our bodies, it impacts every other role that we play in our lives. Like, everywhere you go, there you are, which is great when you're feeling great. But when you're not feeling great, it's not so great. And it's really frustrating, right? So like, a lot of the questions that I hear is like, Leanne, why do I do that? Or like, why can't I stop that, right? And so here's the thing, like, we all have our own different like cause and effect cycle for this pattern and cycle of overeating or controlling and then like feeling out of control. So what I'm going to do is simply share really just the three most common ones that come up in my life, or that did come up in my life really. And here's the thing, I still have to be mindful about these triggers for myself. You know what I mean? But it's once you have the tools, it just doesn't own you anymore. But these are the most common ones that now generally I see showing up in my clients' lives. And so the first one is something that we have and will continue to talk about here on the podcast, because it's the kind of thing, like, honestly, you might need to hear it 100 times before it really hits you. Like, I know it sure did for me. And so the first one is the diet mentality. And sorry, not sorry for sounding like a broken record, right? And so whenever we are playing that game of eat less, move more, or the game of control, restriction, deprivation, and obsession, or the game of like can or can't have that, or should or shouldn't eat that, or good, bad, right, wrong, like labels around food, it's only a matter of time before we can't take it any longer, or we stray from the plan and overeat. And so this is not your fault, ladies. Like, even the most disciplined and strong-willed woman can't win when you're playing this losing game. And so that's reason number one. And I won't go too deep into that, as we've already talked about this a lot on the podcast, but I just want to reiterate again, a lot of women think like, oh, I have a food problem. It's like, no, what's causing this like really disordered relationship with food is that diet mentality, the weight loss mentality, right? So reason number 2, and this is especially around this time of year, reason number 2 is you might still, or probably do still, have an emotional or stressful relationship with food. And by the way, this goes for your body too, but we're talking about food specifically. And so for me, I started using sugar as my numbing device and my boredom killer and my security blanket, like a comfort, from a very young age. And it was always there for me when I needed it. Like, it was my comfort, it was my drug. And so as an adult, I just brought that relationship with me into adulthood. Only now, food was, for lack of a better way of saying it, it became my boyfriend when I was lonely, or my source of relaxation and comfort when I had a hard day or felt stressed. And so when you have an emotional relationship with food, it doesn't matter what logical plan you have about what you're going to eat, because your emotions will eventually win out. They'll always win out. And so, yeah, you can motivate or persuade yourself not to eat certain things, but until you unwire that emotional relationship with food that's occurring in your brain, and you go and fire and wire a new relationship with food, emotions will always win out in the long run. And so again, this is not your fault, ladies. Like, I don't want you to sit here and shame yourself. Like, there's nothing wrong with you if you do have an emotional relationship with food. Like, it's a brain thing. It's a connection that got created that can be rewired at any time. Like, you're never too young, too old, too lost, too far gone to create that brain change. Okay. So just remember that. But first, you have to acknowledge, like, okay, this is not me logically sabotaging myself. There's something going on in my brain, and there's a connection going on that until I break that connection and rewire a new connection in my brain, it's gonna keep happening, right? So that's reason number 2. And then reason number 3, this is the one that a lot of times people don't like to hear, but I wish somebody had told me that. Number 3 is you haven't ever fully committed to transforming your relationship with food. And so this is the conversation I had to eventually have with myself. And this is the conversation that I have with every single one of my clients before we start working together. It's not during our work, it's beforehand, because this is really where I can tell if they're ready to heal this. And so one of the things I asked them, like, hey, are you committed to solving this? Like, are you committed to ending the struggle? Like, not just putting a Band-Aid on it, right? And so there's a huge, massive difference between when you're interested in something versus when you are so flippin' radically committed to something. And so here's the thing. When I'm interested in something, like, I might do it, I might not. I might dabble in it, I might not. Like, I'm not in it, but I'm not out. Again, I'm in the gray, right? And doing something halfway because it feels better than doing nothing, but like in reality, when you end up feeling worse because you know you're only dabbling, that's what I mean by being interested in something. Because when you're merely interested in something, that's what you do. You just dabble. Like, it might happen or it might not, right? Versus when you are radically committed, like you've made it non-negotiable, right? A fire-breathing dragon and tornado couldn't stop you when it's non-negotiable. And you know what I mean too. Like, think about a time that you were so committed to something or committed to a goal or an outcome that like nothing could and nothing did stop you. And then compare it to a time when you were like kind of in it, but not really in it. Like, there's a big difference. The other thing is like a lot of people, and we've talked about this a lot with the self-esteem and self-trust factor, but like a lot of people, when they commit to doing things for other people, they are so intentional about maintaining that integrity, and they would never go back on promises. Like, they would, even at the expense of their own health or happiness, would like do what they said they were going to do for others. But when it comes to committing to themselves, that's the difference. They stay interested, but never fully commit. And so when it comes to ending this struggle and really the suffering around food, like, you cannot dabble. This is something that like doesn't go away on its own, and it doesn't fix itself. And so my mentor says it best. He says, like, you can't be partially pregnant, right? And so that's the thing. Like, you can't partially commit to healing your relationship with food. You have to fully commit when it comes to healing a disordered relationship with food. It's really like, it's an insidious disease, the self-image and body image that comes alongside disordered eating as well. It's sneaky. It sneaks up on you. Like, you might maybe minimize it and be like, oh my gosh, like everybody, there's so many people I know that have it so much worse. This isn't a really big problem, but it's like, no, you have to get to the point where you realize like, this is a really big problem because it's taking over my life. It's taking me away from health. It's taking me away from happiness. I'm showing up as this shrunken version of myself that isn't proud of who she is. And it's getting worse, not better. And so, we tend to, again, minimize it. And it's like, no, you have to realize like this is a really big problem and you have to cut out the cancer, for lack of a better way of saying it, because it will get worse. It will spread. It will kind of manifest in other areas of your life if you don't address it. And so for me, my enough is enough point came when I realized like I just couldn't live another day with all the stress and obsession and emotion that was coming alongside food, because, it might sound dramatic to somebody who's never struggled with the demons of living inside of a food prison. But, for all the ladies listening to this podcast, I know that you get it. But really, it was ruining my life. It was taking over my life. Like, I felt awful about myself, and all of the shame and the judgment and the self-criticism I felt, it just spilled out into every other area of my life. And that's when I realized like I needed to do something radical. Like I couldn't just dabble in fixing the problem because it went deep, and I had to get committed, as in my internal dialogue had to shift from like, I want to, or like maybe I was saying like, yeah, that'd be nice, I'd like to like, no, like I'm doing this. Like I'm friggin' gonna address my struggles with food once and for all. I'm gonna learn a way of eating that I can actually live with. Like I want this to be easy. I want to be happy. Like, why is this so hard? Like I'm committed to not having this ever be hard again. And I had to release myself from the prison I'd been living in for 30 years. And it's when that conversation for me shifted from like, it's not a matter of if, it's a matter of when, because this is happening. And so for my clients, some of their enough is enough moments came in the form of, and it's never like, it's interesting what motivates us. You know what I mean? Like we have to find what really pushes us over our edge to move into radical, impact or impacting our lives in a different direction. But, some of my clients, it came like their moments came in the form of like, hey, realizing that they were passing on their food struggles to their children. Like they became deathly afraid that if they didn't do something about it, they would have to witness their daughters or their sons go through the same pain and suffering that they were experiencing. Some of my clients, it was like realizing that they were, creating a disconnect or even like losing the connection between their husbands or their partners because, there was only so many times their partner could try to be intimate and get rejected, or, tell her she was beautiful and get rejected before the rift got too big to repair, that they were actually afraid that the hold that food had over their life would ruin their relationship. And again, that might sound like crazy to some people, but there's so many women I talk to that this has become like a third wheel in their relationship. Like they can't go out to eat. They get like snippy with their husbands. Like it's really just putting a rift in their relationship, and their husbands are just like, I want the happy person that I married back. It's not about the food. It's not about the weight. It's about these people are not happy. Right. And if you're listening to this and this is your struggle, I guarantee you, you're not happy, like as happy as you really can be. Right. Some of my clients realized how much money they were spending trying to fix the problem with, diets and gym memberships. And, some of my clients had like gastric bypass and the sleeve and medical supervised weight loss and like all these things. Some of my clients did like liposuction. I mean, you name it. Right. And so they realized like how much money they were spending on fixing the problem, but also like it's a simple math. Like a lot of money gets spent on food because, a lot of people don't know this, but the average dieter actually throws away about $4,000 every single year in groceries for foods that they bought like when they were dieting but didn't use, and the average overeater spends about $5,000 a year on binge foods and drive-thrus and Starbucks and eating out. And so from again, it was a financial cost. But I think the big one, and for a lot of my clients, it was simply just realizing they were just sick and tired of food keeping them in this prison of control and shame and loneliness and just feeling like a failure all the time. Because They were just sick of this being that one thing in their life, like the elephant in the room that was stealing their joy, robbing them of their freedom, and causing them to feel like they were trapped in a body that really didn't represent who they were. Right? And that's the other thing, just to reiterate, a lot of my clients, like they had shame about their shame because they're like, oh my gosh, is this really a problem? Like, is this really a thing? I have this amazing life. Like, why am I complaining? And it's like, no, pain is pain, ladies. Like, this is a really big problem, especially if it is a really big problem for you. And if it is for you, you know what I'm talking about, right? And so again, it shows up differently for each of us, but I believe that we do all need to hit. It doesn't have to be like some deep, dark rock bottom, but we do have to hit that enough is enough point that causes us to shift from being interested in addressing the struggle to actually committed to solving it for good. Okay, so we can't take a look at why we overeat without looking at the opposite spectrum of this conversation, without looking at the cause. So why do we, and like I said before, it's that diet mentality, like why do we restrict and deprive and try to control ourselves, right? Like, and this is also one of the most common things I get asked, like the most common frustrations I hear about with the women I talk to and work with. And one of the topics that the health and weight loss industry are just still throwing diets at to solve. And so it might sound a bit counterintuitive, but overeating isn't really a food problem. It's a relationship with food problem. And when you make the internal shifts in your thinking and fire and wire a new relationship with food that sets you up for freedom, that is when the food can really just go be food again. Because A, most women simply deprive themselves of what they actually need. And B, most women don't know how to, like in the moment, distinguish between what they actually need and what they just want. Like when their brain is just like tapping them on the shoulder being like, go get chocolate, go drive through Chick-fil-A, whatever it is for you. And so let's talk about both of these things. Let's cover all the bases, okay? So the first part, like why do you diet and starve and deprive yourself of what you need? Like why is control like such a thing for all of us, right? And the simple answer is like, you just most likely learned what I learned and what I found almost every woman who struggles with her body learned, which again, and I'm guessing you're sensing a theme here, is the diet mentality, which is that eat less, move more mentality. And another way of saying it is the weight loss mentality. So when you are like focusing on weight loss at the expense of your health and happiness. Like nobody thinks that weight loss, everybody thinks like, oh, if I lose weight, I'll be healthier, I'll be happier. It's like actually the weight loss mentality is causing you to move in the opposite direction, right? And we talk about this in our stressless eating program. I call it the repair mentality, which is like when you are favoring that short-term fix, like weight loss, for example, at the expense of long-term permanent results and happiness, right? And so again, though, like this is not your fault. There is an entire multi-billion-dollar industry that is feeding this mentality to women of all ages, colors, shapes, and sizes. And so if you are a woman and you have a pulse, chances are that this is the type of solution and the messaging that you are being given, right? And this almost definitely always entails restriction, deprivation, punishment, and persuasion, like forcing yourself to do the things you don't want to do to stay the course. And these are all weapons of control. It's just another way to control yourself. And I'm just going to get on a soapbox for a minute, but there's a bunch of things out there nowadays. I'm just going to call it out. Noom is one of them. Weight Watchers is talking about it too. Like they're trying to say like, oh, this is a lifestyle and this is a psychological, emotional approach to food. And it's like, no, it is literally another way of tracking, counting, weighing, and measuring. Only you're using like colors instead of points and all of that. So also don't be fooled because saying that something is taking like a more holistic mental, emotional approach to food and weight loss, it's very in vogue right now. Everyone's throwing around those statements like as throwaways because it's cool. But if you are moving in the direction of more control, like restriction, deprivation, counting, weighing, measuring, tracking, good, bad, should, shouldn't, all, nothing, red light, green light, whatever, it's all just another form of control. It's more of the same, right? And I've never met a woman that actually wants to feel more controlled by food or her body. Like what she wants is freedom. Like what you want is freedom, right? In reality, though, control is the opposite of freedom. Yet the consensus of the experts in health, they're throwing more diets, more band-aids, and more deprivation at this problem. And that just inevitably leaves us stuck on the all-nothing, black, white, on-off results roller coaster. It's a recipe for failure, ladies. And unfortunately, I don't see the mainstream diet industry changing their tune anytime soon. And that's why you have to take ownership of this yourself. Like another diet, I promise you, it's just going to make it worse. And so that's my answer to the first part of this topic in terms of like, why do you deprive yourself of what you need? Because that is what you're being taught. You're being taught that that's health. And it's not your fault. Like you learned what I learned, that eat less, move more diet mentality. And unfortunately, that line of thinking will force you to use weapons of control. And by default, it'll move you away from freedom and peace of mind and happiness. But if we want freedom, as in like breaking free from the food and body prison and feeling free to just live our lives the way that we want and moving towards peace and happiness and freedom, we've got to start practicing peace and happiness and freedom, right? So a little check-in, like what are you practicing, right? So now let's address the second part of this. Like, why is it so difficult in the moment to distinguish between what you need and what you want? Like, am I hungry? Do I need this? Do I want this? Why do I know what to do but can't get myself to do it? Like all of those things. This is one of the most common struggles that presents itself in my clients when they first come to work with me, because they aren't sure how to distinguish their reasons for eating or why they're doing what they're doing, because they're asking myself, like, is it because I need it and require it, or is it because I want it and desire it? And, this mix-up happens in the brain because we have like totally ignored our brains for so long, and we're just like kind of robots to our brains. And so why does this mix-up happen in our brains, like making it feel impossible to distinguish between the two? And my simple answer is this, kind of piggybacking on what I just said, like, what are you practicing? Because again, we get good at whatever we practice. The brain gets better at whatever we practice. And so again, if you're anything like me and most women that I encounter, chances are you've been practicing control around food for as long as you can remember. So in turn, you've been practicing ignoring what you want in need and in favor of control. You've been ignoring hunger, ignoring when your body is like sending you cues, like ignoring when your body's telling you really important things. And the only way to do that, or the only way to break that, I should say, and really the wiring in your brain, because it's become wired. Like you are now wired to ignore hunger or to favor the clock or your meal plan over what your body's actually telling you or whatever it is, right? The only way to break that habit and the wiring in your brain is to go create new wiring in your brain. And so in other words, like if you want to be different and show up differently, you've got to think differently. And so that means practicing a new way of thinking and a new way of being around food. And so what does that look like practically speaking? Like a lot of women ask me like, okay, Leah, that sounds great in theory, but what does that look like? And so the way I personally see it is it's got to be a process of healing your relationship with food and really like relearning how to think about food and how to eat. Like not how to count, not how to measure, not how to portion control, not how to put more foods in a category of good, bad, right? It's how to use food and eat with freedom and choice and pleasure and listening to your body. And again, I'll emphasize the pleasure part because, like, again, if love and warm chocolate chip cookies is wrong, I don't want you to be right. In other words, it's a process where instead of focusing on like what you're eating, so whether it's a carb, a fat, or has enough protein, like whether it's good food, bad food, or whether you should or shouldn't eat it, or like how much it weighs, like how many calories, points, grams, servings it has, right? Or like instead of focusing on controlling and restricting and micromanaging and depriving and starving and maintaining your willpower or just like obsessing over food, again, all of these things, it causes you to focus, stress, and obsess over food even more. I believe the solution lives in making you a better, stronger, more powerful, and resilient version of you every single day so that no matter what happens, you feel like you are the influencer in your life and over food rather than reacting to your life and reacting to food. And so, in other words, it's really just a matter of learning a new skill, like essentially learning a new language when it comes to food and creating a new relationship with food. And it looks like this, like, first of all, it entails like learning how to stop controlling food, which again, sounding like a broken record, but sometimes we have to hear something 1,000 times. Stop controlling food and learning how to influence who you are being around food and the decision process or decision-making process that you actually use to determine how you are around food so that you feel in control of yourself rather than relying on control and restriction and deprivation and persuasion or relying on really limited resources like willpower and discipline, because you'll run out of those eventually, right? In other words, it's going from the external to the internal, like no longer focusing on food, but focusing on you, focusing on influencing you and who you're being and how you want to feel around food, so that in turn, you change your relationship with food. I call it food goggles. That's what I give my clients. I literally teach them a new way of thinking around food so that they can see it through a new lens. And then when you learn that, it simply becomes a matter of walking around with those new goggles everywhere you go. And it's goggles that gets easier the more you use them, and you get better at using them the more you use them, rather than dieting gets harder and you get worse at it, right? And so again, it's just taking that time and energy to learn the new language around food one time, and then it just comes with you everywhere you go. So you're not having to constantly focus on food. That is where the freedom lives. That is where the peace of mind lives. And that is where you can finally find health and happiness instead of expensing health and happiness, like moving away from it or feeling like you're trying to go for weight loss at the expense of those two things. But you have to replace the old thinking. It doesn't just go away on its own. You've got to replace it. So again, coming back full circle, why do we overeat and why do we commit to something and then ruin it by ditching our plans and again, overeat or overindulge? And so again, at the sake of sounding like a broken record, here's what I can tell you again with the utmost certainty. Ladies, food is not the problem. Food is not the enemy. It's your thoughts about food that are the problem. And just like your body isn't the problem and your body isn't the enemy, it's your thoughts about your body that are the problem. It's the diet mentality that is the problem. It's that thinking, that all or nothing, black, white, up, down, roller coaster. That is the problem because as you're learning, you can't ever get off of it. Or if you do get off of it, you become terrified that you're going to go gain weight or go off the deep end because you don't know that middle ground, right? And so what happens is either way, whether you're on it or you're off it, you feel like a slave to it because you become a hostage and it feels like it controls your life more than you do. And so here's the honest truth. Like you're never going to out diet or out will or outsmart your relationship with food, like never. And so trying to address your internal struggles, like the self-image that's causing you to think and act and feel and behave the way that you currently are around food, and trying to address that with another diet or another exercise program, it really is just a recipe for failure. Like, I can flat out guarantee it. And so that's why I'm trying to just save you that time and energy, because again, you'll never be able to out diet or out willpower or outsmart your current relationship with food. It really is as simple as that. And so until you swim upstream and address your relationship with food and heal that, again, I'm not trying to be all doom and gloom. I just wish somebody had told me this. Like, until you do that, diets will end and they will fail you. Your brain will never go get good at your next diet, and you'll stay stuck on that all or nothing roller coaster, because the solution doesn't live in another diet or program or plan. And trust me, like, if it did, I wish it would have, because I tried that. I tried to out diet and out will my food struggles and sugar addictions for decades. But I mean it. The solution is not to go on another diet. The solution has to be a brain solution if you ever want to solve this problem for good. Like, it has to address your self-image, because really the thinking, and like when you change what you're seeing and what you're saying, and yeah, you also need a better strategy, that is when that diet madness can finally end and the real healing can begin. And then, and only then, can you finally be free, which is what you really want, right? And so again, I would be doing you a disservice if I tried to give you tips and tricks to, avoid cravings or help you put a Band-Aid on the real problem. Like, the truth will set you free. And this is the kind of thing that I wish somebody had told me decades ago. And I wish somebody had told me every time the holiday season came around and I felt even more out of control and more helpless and hopeless. And every time New Year's came around and I made these meaningless New Year's resolutions, knowing that nothing inside of my head and my heart and my brain actually changed. And so, like, that's where I'm here to ask you, what if this year things really were different for you? And if you are freaking out a bit about the holidays and you don't want to bring your old habits with you into the next year and into the new year, then I hope that this episode spoke to your heart and made you realize that A, not only are you not crazy, but B, you don't have to live like this. And, so many different times on this podcast, like, you've heard my story and you know that I suffered and struggled with this for decades. And it seriously just sucks. And I don't want any woman to suffer like I did, like, not when you don't have to. And so if you're tired of food and your body just running and ruining your life and being the thing that's holding you back, and you're ready to start getting real transformation around this and a real breakthrough, then just listen to the end of this episode to find out how you can get off that diet roller coaster and really remove the stress and emotion and obsession from food for good, but in a few months rather than a few years. And also, like, without all the dieting and restricting and depriving, or, needing to go open up an emotional can of worms or spend years in therapy to do it, like, just actually cut to the heart of it. And I can promise you this, like, you don't have to bring your old habits and thinking with you into the new year, but that brain of yours, it won't change all by itself. And that's why I'm simply inviting you to have a truthful and loving conversation about what it would look like to really put this problem to bed for good. Thanks for tuning in to today's show. If you like what you heard and you're interested in breaking out of your own food, body, and diet prison, here's what I want you to do next. Head on over to stresslesseating.com. That's stresslesseating.com and sign up to watch the Stressless Eating webinar, where I'll walk you through the exact 5-step game plan my female clients use to conquer emotional eating, self-sabotage, and finally heal themselves from the restrictive all-or-nothing diet mentality for good, but without obsessing or spending years in therapy to address it. I've laid it all out for you there in 5 easy steps. Remember, healing your relationship with food and your body does not happen by itself. You need expert guidance to make it happen, and we've helped clients all over the world take back their power from the food and find true and lasting freedom while enjoying life and warm chocolate chip cookies along the way. To see if we can help you do the same, head on over to stresslesseating.com. I'm Leanne Ellington, and I'll see you next time.